The ultrasound tech asked me if I wanted to hear the heartbeat, and for a second I thought about saying no because I already had a soundtrack in my head. Evan's voice the night I left him, quiet and steady, telling me, "I hope you find what you're looking for, Joe. I just hope it isn't me." The room smelled like sanitizer and warm dust. The monitor hummed. The tech smiled the way strangers do when they've learned not to take anyone's joy for granted. "There it is," she said, and the galloping filled the air, bright and insistent, like a tiny horse trying to outrun my shame. I never pictured myself as the woman asking the receptionist if prenatal care is covered by pregnancy Medicaid, or how to apply for WIC, or whether I needed to bring proof of address even though I'd been sleeping on my sister's pullout since the rich fling I appended my life for told me he was not in a place to be a father to anyone except himself. I used to roll my eyes at money-saving forums and coupon binders and budgeting apps because Evan loved them. He is the kind of man who gets joyful about a 3% high-yield savings account. He is the kind of man who labels chords. I am the kind of woman who used to say, "I'll figure it out," like it was a personality trait. Now, figuring it out looks a lot like Googling, "How long after birth can you file for child support at 3 a.m.? While the baby inside me practices karate on my bladder. Back when everything was still pretty, Evan and I were together for 3 years. He is soft-eyed and bespectacled, all brain and patience, a software engineer who wore the same gray hoodie until it had a thumb-sized hole near the cuff that he called ventilation. He cooked on Sundays for the week. Beans, rice, roasted vegetables like edible Tetris. He drove a dented Corolla with a Bluetooth adapter attached to an AUX cord that he'd repaired with heat shrink tubing. He loves board games and pour-over coffee and documentaries about bridges. When we met, he was charming in a way that never felt like a sale. Less sparkle, more gravity. Everyone loves Evan once they pay attention long enough to notice he's been paying attention the whole time. I loved him in a quiet way that made sense, like a room you can always find in the dark. And then, slowly, I started to resent the dark. I got a promotion at the agency where I do social for mid-tier brands. The kind of accounts that send us branded tote bags and promise exposure instead of raises. The promotion came with a title and more work and a $4,000 raise that somehow felt like a prize and an insult at the same time. I started going to client dinners. I learned the names of wines that don't come in screw tops. I washed my hair more. I started following influencers who talked about leveling up like it was a staircase only visible to the brave. Enter Graham. He was a senior VP at one of our bigger clients, early 40s, white teeth, navy suit you can smell from across a room because it whispers money. He is the kind of man who says names like he's putting a coin in a slot, Joe. He is the kind of man who orders for the table without asking, who tips with a flourish, who never looks at the check long enough to notice numbers. He noticed me. He laughed at my jokes even when they weren't jokes. He said things like, "You have an eye for leverage," which made me feel like a stock anyone would be lucky to own. He called Evan the professor when I mentioned him, then mimed pushing glasses up his nose. I laughed because I wanted to be liked. It didn't happen all at once. I wish I could tell you I woke up bad one day. It was worse than that, it was incremental. I started editing Evan in my stories. Posting him from the neck down, the food he made me instead of his face, to keep the vibe elevated. I softened the word boyfriend to my guy in rooms where married men wore their watches like warning labels. I started staying late at work and calling it hustle. I bought shoes that hurt and told myself the ache was proof I was going somewhere. You already know where this is going. I told Evan I needed a different pace, which was a pretty way to say richer. I did not use the word money. I said worldview and ambition and alignment. He listened with his patient face on, the one he wears when the code won't compile and he knows the bug is his. He asked one question, "Is there someone else?" I told the truth I thought would hurt least. Not technically. He nodded. He didn't throw anything. He didn't beg. He said, "I love you. I won't compete with a fantasy." He boxed up the mug I kept at his place. The one that says, "Nevertheless," she caffeinated. And set it by the door. He offered to help carry my plants to my car. I cried because even his kindness felt like a rebuke. Graham made it easy to forget the mess I'd made. He took me to a rooftop bar where the drinks were mostly ice and light. He ordered oysters without looking at the price. He bought me a silk dress just because, which I wore like a certificate that said, I belong now. He slept in sheets that felt like hotel paperwork. He had art on his walls I did not understand. When he asked me about Evan, I said, he's a sweet guy, the way people talk about weather. When Evan texted to say he'd found a sweater of mine under his couch, I let it sit for 2 days before writing back, you can donate it. Graham kissed my neck and asked if I had ever been to Cabo in the slow season. I said no. He said, let's go. I posted a picture of my feet in a pool with a caption about new chapters. He told me he'd had a vasectomy at 35 after an upsetting breakup where the woman used oops as a noun. I'm careful now, he said, like he was talking about sensitive skin. I had been on the pill since 21 and I kept taking it until he put the idea in my head that we didn't need to. We're adults, he said. I did the snip. You don't need to pump yourself with hormones. I googled vasectomy failure rates and learned they are low but not non-existent. I decided even the small percentage felt romantic. 2 months later, my period took a personal day and then another. I peed on a stick at 5:40 a.m. in his marble bathroom and watched 2 lines appear like red flags. I told him at dinner because I thought the public place would keep us safe. He set his fork down with the kind of care that means anger has manners. That's not possible, he said, and my stomach formed a fist. You said you were snipped, I said, trying to sound light because if I sounded scared the scared would take over the room. He shrugged like a syllabus. It was years ago. It worked. This can't be mine. He offered to pay for whatever you decide, and I understood that he had decided already. I left the restaurant without paying the bill and sat on the curb and cried into a napkin that said the restaurant's name in a font that suddenly felt insulting. I wanted to call Evan so badly my fingers shook. I wanted him to tell me it would be okay, even though the only okay he owed me was the one he took away when I drove off with my plants. I didn't call. I texted my sister, Mariah, who lives 20 minutes away and works night shift at the hospital. She came and sat with me on the curb. She didn't say, I told you so. She said, we should go home. She made tea I did not drink. She put me on her couch and tucked a blanket around me like I had a fever. In the morning, she took me to a clinic. They confirmed what the stick had suggested, I was 7 weeks pregnant. The nurse asked me if the father would be involved. I laughed because a dripping faucet somewhere sounded like applause. Graham did not reply to my texts for 3 days. When he finally did, he sent me a phone number for a doctor who can take care of it no questions asked and a screenshot of a bank transfer. I told him I was keeping the baby. He called me reckless. He said he had too much on his plate to parent someone else's child. I told him we could do a paternity test. He said, after it's born. He said he would not be signing anything at the hospital that could later be used against me, and even though that sentence should have made me throw my phone in a lake, all I could think was how quickly he'd found a script. I learned a new language that week, words like established paternity, child support guidelines, acknowledgement of parentage, genetic testing, retroactive. It turns out, this is how it works in our state, you can't force a man to take a paternity test while you're pregnant unless there's a court order tied to another case. Child support starts after the baby is born and after paternity is established either because he signs the voluntary acknowledgement at the hospital or because a court orders a cheek swab. If he won't sign, the Department of Healthcare and Family Services can help you open a case. They will send letters. He can ignore them for a while but not forever. If paternity is established, they can garnish wages. The internet said a lot of things and I tried to believe only the ones that were boring and true. I told my boss I was pregnant because I started throwing up into my trash can at 9:23 every morning like an alarm. She said all the right things and then reminded me our account was entering a heavy deliverables quarter. We do not have paid maternity leave, we have short-term disability, which is a phrase that should carry a warning label for how it can make you feel about your own body. I started saving money with a devotion that would have made Evan smile if he still looked at me. I cancelled my lash extensions and my gym membership I never used. I sold the silk dress for half of what it cost because luxury depreciates faster than cars. I stopped buying salads that get delivered in bowls you can keep, which I used to justify as basically free Tupperware. I moved into Mariah's second bedroom because she loves me, and love is the only currency that doesn't calculate interest. I told my mother in the least dramatic way I could manage. She cried the complicated tears of a woman who has watched her daughters make the same mistakes with different outfits. She asked about Graham. I told her the truth, he wouldn't even look at me now. She asked about Evan. I told her I couldn't ask him for anything because he doesn't owe me anything. She nodded. That's right, she said. He owes you nothing. But I hope you apologize anyway. I wrote Evan a letter instead of a text because somehow the slowness made it more honest. I told him I was pregnant and that I was sorry. I told him I had picked sparkle over substance and learned that sparkle burns. I told him I missed the safety of his quiet kitchen, the way he squeezes lemon over roasted vegetables like it's a sacrament. I wrote I loved you poorly but I loved you, which is the kind of sentence that sounds like growth and is really just a confession of cowardice. I did not ask him for anything. I sent it to his new address, which I'd seen accidentally on LinkedIn when he posted about buying a little house with a porch. He did not reply. He didn't owe me that either. I saw him a month later at the grocery store, near the avocados. He had grown a beard that made him look older, or maybe just more like the man who always lived under the boy I dated. He was with a woman I didn't recognize. Tall, black curls, a smile that reached her eyes like a handshake. They were laughing at something near the tomatoes. He saw me. His face did that stillness I used to mistake for shyness and now understand as intention. He walked over alone and asked, "How are you?" It was too big a question for a produce aisle. "Okay," I said. He looked at my belly, still just a rumor under my hoodie. He said, "I received your letter." He didn't say thank you or I forgive you. He said, "I'm glad you're taking care of yourself." He didn't hug me. He didn't ask anything about the father. He was kind in the bounded way of a man who learned how to hold what is his and nothing else. I wanted to dissolve into the floor like produce mist. The rich Fling. And I hate that this is his name, but it's what he is now. Stayed consistent in his inconsistency. He sent another transfer. He sent a link to a therapist who specializes in difficult decisions, which is code for women he hopes will not make his life complicated. He texted me an article about vasectomy failure statistics with the part highlighted that says late failure is rare but possible. He asked if I was sure the timeline made it possible. I told him I had been with one person in the timeframe, him. He told me he had a lawyer. I told him I had a baby. Mariah dragged me to a free legal clinic the county hosts on Tuesdays. I waited in a hallway with people holding envelopes like shields. A woman with a lanyard explained paternity establishment like she'd done it 1,000 times and could do it 1,000 more. Keep all communication, she said. Screenshots are your friend. Keep receipts for your prenatal vitamins and your medical visits. You may be able to petition for birth expenses depending on the judge. She told me not to sign anything Graham's lawyer sent me without bringing it to them first. You can't sign away your kid's right to support, she said. That's not yours to give. I wrote it down and underlined it twice because there is a version of me who would have signed anything to avoid being inconvenient. I am trying not to be her anymore. People talk about pregnancy glow like it's a magic trick. For me, glow is sweat and trying to find a sleeping position that doesn't make me feel like a turtle flipped on its shell. I learned the names of aches. Round ligament pain sounds like geometry and feels like the stab you get when you try to run after sitting too long. I chose a prenatal class at the hospital where Mariah works because it was $30 with her employee discount and came with a tour of the labor ward. I cried in Target looking at tiny socks because even meanness can't stand up to socks that small. I made a registry that felt like manifesting the life of a person I hope I become. The morning sickness eased at 13 weeks, which the internet told me was not a guarantee but a gift. I ate grilled cheese like penance. Evan posted a picture of a loaf of bread on his porch with a caption about first bake in the new house. His new girlfriend. Fiancé, as it turned out. Commented a heart. He replied with a bread emoji. It was banal and holy. I did not show Mariah because she would have told me to stop looking. I didn't show my mother because she would have printed the picture and taped it to my mirror as a reminder that men like Evan are the prize I threw back into the ocean. I just looked at it and felt something break and then reset inside me like a bone healing crooked and strong. At 20 weeks, I found out the baby is a girl. The tech gave me a printout of a face that looks like a moon. I put it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a watermelon slice. I named her in my head and out loud only when no one was listening. I stopped fantasizing about sudden reconciliation scenes where Graham shows up with flowers and an apology written by a PR team. I started fantasizing about 6 months from now when I file the paperwork at the child support office, hand over the birthday and the weight and the name, and let a system bigger than my pride go to work. I started fantasizing about Evan's porch because hope is stubborn, but even my fantasies knew it wasn't for me anymore. It was for him and the woman with the black curls and the bread. Graham and I met once more, in his office because he insisted. He wore a tie that probably has a name. I wore a dress I bought secondhand that made me feel less like a cautionary tale. I told him again that I was keeping the baby. He said words like mutually agreeable outcome and privacy. He said he'd be willing to contribute a lump sum if I could refrain from making this difficult. I asked if he meant don't file for paternity and child support. He said he meant be reasonable. I said being reasonable meant making sure my daughter is covered by her father's insurance and that support is calculated by the same math that applies to everyone else. He said he couldn't be sure he was the father. I told him about paternity testing. How it's a cheek swab, no needles, no drama, court-ordered if necessary, done after birth. He looked annoyed. I knew things. Knowledge is awful that way, it ruins plausible deniability. He asked me why I was so sure this was a good idea. I told him I wasn't sure about anything except that my daughter deserved a shot at boring security. I told him about Evan's beans and rice, how you can live on them and still feel loved. I told him about porches. He told me I was sentimental. I told him he was a coward dressed like a gentleman. He asked me to leave. I did. I cried in the elevator in front of a woman who pretended she couldn't tell because the kindest thing a stranger can do sometimes is pretend. Month 7 arrived like a sleepy elephant. I waddled. People smiled at me in the grocery store and touched my belly without permission, and I wanted to bite them and also cry at their kindness. I took naps that felt like falling through a trapdoor and woke up with drool on my cheek and hope under my tongue. I packed a hospital bag with lists I found online from women who love telling other women what to bring. I printed out a birth plan that really just says, do what keeps me and the baby safe. Mariah took me to buy a car seat because she refuses to let me ride share home from the hospital. My mother sewed tiny bibs from a dress she wore in the 80s that makes me wonder if I will ever forgive her era for shoulder pads. On a Tuesday in March, Evan's fiancé posted a picture of their engagement on a hill near the lake. Her ring is modest in a way that feels expensive. She looks so happy the picture almost hums. I sat on my sister's couch and cried not because I wanted it to be me but because I am no longer the kind of person that news makes miserable. I texted him 3 words, I'm happy for you. He wrote back, thank you. I saved the text like a receipt for something I paid for in humility. Labor is the kind of pain that turns you into a religion. It started with cramps that felt like bad sushi and then became a metronome I couldn't ignore. Mariah drove me to the hospital like we were late for a show we'd both been trying not to attend. The nurse asked about the father. I said, he won't be here, and she did not ask another question because nurses know when to stop. I squeezed a barf bag into a ball. I said things to Mariah that would make a priest blush. I pushed. I pushed more. I asked if I was dying. A resident with gentle eyes said no and suggested I pretend to blow out birthday candles. Eventually the room changed shape and there she was. Angry and perfect, a sound in the world where there had been only sounds inside me. I named her out loud. I cried. Everyone cried because babies make even cynical rooms soft. They handed me forms for the birth certificate. There's a space for the father's name. The nurse explained calmly that if he isn't here to sign the acknowledgement, we can leave it blank, we can add it later after testing or a signed voluntary acknowledgement. She said people do that all the time. She said, the important thing is you and this baby. I left it blank. It felt like honesty and like a wound. I breastfed. I failed. I tried again. The lactation consultant told me I'm not a bad mother if I use formula. I documented everything like I was building a case, diapers, ounces, sleep stretches, the way her hair smells like milk and clouds. 2 weeks later, I filed the case with the child support office. I brought the birth certificate and a copy of her hospital bracelet because I am dramatic and also because I want them to understand she is a person, not a number. The clerk had the exact right mix of brisk and kind. She told me next steps, they will send a notice, he can agree to test or not, if not a court date gets set. If paternity is established, they will calculate support based on his gross income, according to state guidelines. If he has health insurance, they will require him to add her. If he refuses, they can garnish wages. I asked about back support. She said that depends on the judge, sometimes they set it from the date of birth or the date of filing. She told me to keep receipts. I left with a pamphlet that made me feel both seen and like a line on a spreadsheet. Both are true. Both can be survived. Graham's lawyer emailed something that smelled like strategy and cologne. It suggested a private arrangement in exchange for mutual confidentiality. I forwarded it to the legal clinic. They told me not to sign. We scheduled a paternity test. He showed up to the lab looking like a man who had been inconvenienced. The tech swabbed his cheek like it was a neutral act, which it is. He did not look at the baby. I didn't ask him to. 2 weeks later, the letter came, a probability north of 99%. The math knew what my body already did. The court ordered temporary support. He pretended to be surprised by the number. I pretended I didn't remember the rooftop and the oysters and the silk dress. I started bringing my daughter to the park at Evan's end of town because babies like trees and I like pain apparently. We saw him once, walking with his fiancée and an elderly dog I'd never met. He waved from across the street. He didn't come closer. I loved him for that boundary like you love a railing when you finally realize why it's there. He wins in this story. He won by not auditioning for a sequel. He won by choosing a woman who knows porches are holy. He won by letting me lose, which is a kind of mercy I didn't think I believed in until I was the one who needed it. Sometimes I imagine an alternate universe where I stayed. Evan still would have grown that beard. We still would have bought a small house eventually and he would have fixed the wobble in the kitchen table. I would have learned to love beans and budgets and Sunday prep. We would have built a life that does not glow but warms. Then my daughter kicks her leg and the universe I am in reasserts itself. I left. I chased the light that burns. I got burned. Now I have a tiny person who will someday ask me about her father and I will tell her a version of the truth that makes sense for a child, that grown-ups get confused sometimes, that I thought sparkle meant safe, that sometimes the safest thing is the boring thing you can count on, that she was wanted by me even when it hurt to want her alone. Graham sends the support like it's a tax he hates but cannot evade. He has not met her. He will, eventually, because curiosity is greedy, and because I would rather she know a limited version of him than an invented one. He is not a villain so much as a man who values freedom above responsibility and dresses that preference in good prose. He will not change me. I will not try to change him. The state will do what it does. Garner, calculate, mail. Evan sent a card when she turned 1 month old. It had a cartoon fox on it and the words, "Welcome to the world." Inside, he wrote, in his tidy engineer handwriting, "Wishing you both good health and calm nights." He signed it with both his and his fiancée's names. I cried into it like a woman who has finally learned that kindness is not the same as permission. I didn't write back. I put the card in the box where I keep the ultrasound picture and the hospital bracelet and the pamphlet from the child support office. I am building an archive of the life I chose so I never forget the terms. There are practicalities I didn't know were practicalities. Babies outgrow clothes at a rate that makes physics feel personal. WIC covers formula and cereal and peanut butter and fruit. Medicaid covered my prenatal visits and my delivery, now it covers her pediatrician. We buy diapers in bulk like we joined a tiny, relentless club. I freelance at night while she sleeps, scheduling posts for a bakery that pays me in money and sometimes in sourdough. I learned how to make rice the way Evan taught me and I used to roll my eyes at. I open a savings account in her name with $25 and a vow to add $10 every paycheck, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Sometimes I am lonely in a way that feels like a room with no door. Sometimes I am so in love with her that it feels like a door I didn't know could open in me. Sometimes I scroll Graham's Instagram and see a picture of a beach and wonder if he feels anything when he transfers the money. Sometimes I type Evan's name into my phone and then set it down and make grilled cheese and remember that the most grown-up thing I can do is leave men alone who are doing fine without me. If you were me a year ago, here's what I would tell you: the man who tips loudly will not whisper nursery rhymes in the dark at 3 a.m. The man who knows where every dollar goes will know where to find the burp cloth. The man who labels chords will know how to keep a life from tangling. I am not saying marry an engineer. I am saying don't confuse glamour for care. I am saying the word boring is sometimes just another word for safe, and safe is not a slur. I am saying that if a man tells you he had a vasectomy, ask for the paperwork and still bring your own plan, because your body is not a place to store someone else's trust. When I felt that first heartbeat, I thought of Evan because mine used to sink to his in a way that made the world feel less jagged. Now it sinks to hers, and the jagged edges aren't softer but I am tougher. I wanted the rich Fling to look at me and see a partner. He looked at me and saw a phase. Evan looked at me and saw a future, and I looked away because the future didn't sparkle yet. The guy wins in my story because he didn't go back on himself to make room for my chaos. He built a porch and stood on it until the right person walked up. I learned my lesson the expensive way, which is how I seem to learn everything important. Tomorrow, I will take my daughter to the park by Evan's neighborhood again because the swings there don't squeak and the trees make the wind sound like applause. We will sit on a bench and I will feed her a bottle, and maybe, if the universe wants to be poetic about it, we will see Evan and his wife walking their elderly dog. Maybe we will wave. Maybe we won't. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I am learning to love the boring parts: tracking ounces, keeping receipts, making rice, flipping coupons, saying no to shoes that promise me a different life. The life I have is small and solid and stubbornly warm. It is not an apology. It is a beginning. And the heartbeat that started this whole confession is now a laugh that fills my mother's kitchen and my sister's hallway and the tiny apartment I will move into next spring when the child support is steady and I've saved enough for a deposit and a couch that doesn't eat the remote. I used to think with nothing was a line you put at the end of a bad decision to make it feel dramatic. I am not with nothing. I am with a person who kicks her feet like applause and a network of women who show up with casseroles and lanyards and clipboards and advice, and a card with foxes on it that reminds me kindness is not currency but it buys you a little bit of oxygen. I am with the knowledge that the man I called boring was a better bet than the man I called a dream. I am with the boring truth that matters: porches last longer than rooftop bars, beans and rice taste like security, and the only sparkle that counts is the one in your kid's eyes when you walk into the room again, and again, and again, choosing the life you actually have over the one that would rather not even look at you.